In a way, I don't have to give a talk, because organizing a conference like this epitomizes what it's like to function in the wild. This is the wild. If you think about the complexity of this organization, and that the crew can do it in such, while maintaining integrity of their values and reflect it in terms of community inclusion and transformation, just sets an example for the rest of us. If the form and content of this conference can match the principles and keep to that. And I've been working with them for 6 months, I guess. It keeps going. It's proof that we're not trying to do the impossible. So let me talk a bit about things. There's this canoe that we just saw, and we're actually right there, sort of parallel to Hudson's Bay up in northern Saskatchewan. And it's a metaphor, I know, but the reality is that one of the things I don't have in that canoe is a repair kit, because it is of place. And by the way, if you wrap it around a rock, we can put it back together in 3 days, because the repair kit is on the boreal forest right along there. This kind of canoe is of its place. And the materials are right there, always available. You just pull them to shore, not if, but when, as it did. You have to then pull out your knife and disassemble parts of it, carve new parts, and go flashing down the next rapid. And we're out in the wilderness. There are no roads between there and the North Pole. And we've never been down that river before, and to the best of our knowledge, nobody's been down it for about 30 years. And one of the key things about this isn't just the canoe, the tools, the design of the paddles, but I actually have a buddy here who's one of the world's best rowers canoeists, and it's my canoe, and ego goes down. I'm in the bow, he's in the primary position because he's better than me, and that doesn't threaten me at all. I learn from him. And our partners in crime, as we go through these things, are fundamental, but you're out on a limb. There's no Wi-Fi, you're off grid. And it is, in fact, the same thing that happens in our work and how we move along. So, I like history, and so we talk about functioning in the wild. I really want to recommend, if I was going to say where I first encountered that term, and this uses in Ed Hutchins' book, 95 book, called Cognition in the Wild. And if you haven't read it, I really encourage you to do so, because it gives you some fundamentals to say this is more than about being able to make a great device and a beautiful experience from some gadget or some service or some application. It actually talks about the whole deal, and we have to raise the level up, and this is a very good place. And really, and if Don's in the audience, he's probably going to correct me on my poor reading of the book, but this is my quick précis, is that it speaks about the notion of cognition and intelligence and where it lies within the framework of navigating a ship. Because Ed likes sailing, he likes navigation, he lives in San Diego, he's a colleague of Don's, and he found a way to have his research be related to what his passions were. And so he's studying navigators on ships. And then where does the intelligence of the navigator live? And you can sort of say, well, certainly in the cortex, it's the brain in a bottle kind of approach, that how you learn and where you learn. But it's far more than that. And it's in your hands, it's in your eyes, your physical. So it's embodied intelligence, if you will. But it's also in the tools which are around, your protractor, your compass, all these other tools that are there. But it's not just that, it's where are those tools sitting in context of the desk, the maps and the charts, and we overlay and juxtapose and so on. But it's also in the architecture of the space. So where does the navigator sit relative to where the captain's cabin is and where the helmsman is on the ship? But it's more than that. It's about the social structure, about the interactions of the players who are involved in that place in that situated context. But it's more than that. It's about the culture. Because, for example, the navigator on a commercial ship, the social structures and mores are different than they are in a military ship. And it goes on and on and on like that. And you have to get the entire ecosystem right. And you can't just design at the surface level. We have to go all the way through. So it's not saying what we've been doing over the years, and this is where the inflection point comes about, is this realization where we can now do a pretty good job at things like our gadgets and our applications and services. But it's these larger things where we have to move the design, not forgetting the lower part, but every decision we make at the surface level has to reflect principles and guidelines and opinions, and yes, ethics and values of what we think about in the bigger picture. And in some sense, I'm trying to set Don up for what I expect he's going to talk about, but that's a mug's game to try and guess what that would be. But I'm a mug. But the main thing here is that it's about situated intelligence, and we're trying to cultivate that and set a set of affordances where that to enable that to happen and reduce the complexity of function in the world so we can get on with the things that we really care about in our lives. And coming back to San Diego, you've hit there twice now, La Jolla, first of all, Don, second Ed, is one of my favorite architects is Louis Kahn. And I was in Munich and I saw an exhibit of his work several years ago, and this quote captured my attention instantly when I saw it accompanying one of the pieces. Thoughts exchanged by one and another are not the same in one room as in another. It says there's meaning in place, there's semantics, and that really affects how we interpret and how we speak. And I could take exactly the same words I've said in the last 5 minutes and talk to you in many different contexts, and you would take them very differently. Do you know who I am? Do you know where we are? Are we in a bar? Are we awake? Are we, it's like, and all of that has to be taken into account. And so I'm having problems because of some of my history around this notion of two terms. And the first one is this word ubiquity, which is the foundation of ubiquitous computing, and which most of us have heard and used frequently. And if you look up the meaning of the word, it's the condition of being everywhere, in all places at the same time, in general use, and that's in the Oxford English Dictionary. I worked with Mark Weiser on the team during the period where he was formulating what became the essay, The Computer in the 21st Century, and the team at Xerox PARC that developed these notions of ubiquitous computing. And yet, I'm uncomfortable with that term. And I have to tell you that when that term was introduced by Mark to the rest of us, we all had to go and look it up. It was a fresh term. I mean, there were people who actually were educated outside of being the geeks or whatever, who knew what the word meant, but the majority of us did not know that word. It's nice because it was an unencumbered term, and it could mean what Mark gave meaning. And I think he used the wrong word. And were he alive today, I think he'd agree with me, because what he describes is not ubiquity. And when I looked up the word recently, like in the past year or two, I stumbled across another word, which I think far better suits, and which I would encourage you to take into your vocabulary, and it's ubiety. And ubiety is a close cousin of ubiquity, but inherent to its meaning is the notion of place. And if you go through some Paul Durish and Sarah Bly and others have written about this notion of place, space, and so on and so forth. If you think about place in the broadest sense, in the widest set of dimensions, it comes right back to what Louis Kahn was talking about, is that there's meaning in place. And the same thing about what Ed was talking about in terms of situated intelligence, that it's the condition and respect of place or location, local relationship, and awareness. And if we start thinking about where our technologies or what we design, whatever it is that is, what they are and how they are and who they are, or who they're with, who they interact with, ubiety is the fundamental concept. You do not want everything everywhere all the time for everybody. Rather, you want the right thing in the right place for the right person, for the right task, at the right moment, at the right price. But that means you don't have to have everything everywhere, and so you can be very focused if you understand the semantics of place in the sense that Louis Kahn spoke about in terms of meaning, words and things meaning different things in different places. And I'll give you some examples as we go along. And so I'd argue that just as if you go right back to Henry Dreyfuss in his Designing for People, where the notion of persona were first introduced, at least to my recollection, that We likewise, because you take your design, you test it for all these different persona, and then you make sure I've got pretty good coverage. The notion of Ubadi suggests that we introduce a different term here that I just invented because I needed a fresh word, called playsona. And you have to actually evaluate, when I want to do, support a certain service or a certain activity, I can't just sort of, okay, here's how to do it. No, I have to think about how to do it in every possible place where you might want to do that activity. By the way, the switch does not mean everywhere. It's not about ubiquity. It's the right place. When and where, in what context, would I want to support the service? And now I can start to think what is the canonical set of different ways to do the same thing? And if I start to use those types of notions, we can just transfer the things we've used in the past around persona and start thinking about playsona, and maybe we can get somewhere. I don't know. This is an arbitrary quote, but it was convenient from Emerson. But okay, listen, I was just trying not to repeat a joke I say all the time. What do Canada and transitions have in common? They're both dominated by the states. Okay, that's a totally geek joke. If you don't know graph theory, you're not going to get it. But the point is this. It's not about this location and that location. It's all about, did I go that way? Or did I go that way? Or did I go that way? Right? How do you make the transition? We talk about storyboarding experiences and scenarios and stuff like that. We put all the details in these beautiful screenshots or these cartoon characters, the scenarios, and then we connect them with arrows. If there's not as much detail in the arrows as there are in the states, you've already lost the game. And it's all about the transitions. And this is what's critical and where we really have to focus. It's the animation of behaviors and the transformations of how the activities are manifest as I move from place to place. And it's really important that in the wild, we are not stationary. The activities, which are the essence of mobility, are transitory. And they must flow. And that's where we have to really focus. And this is why I'll start off with water. There seems to be a constant theme from Ed to the canoe to here, but what the heck. And so there's a relationship here between flow and mobility. And when I say mobility, I don't mean your mobile device. I mean mobility of a human activity. That's the only meaningful term of mobile. Mobile computing, mobile activity, the mobile, it's not a device, it's a state where my activity can move intellectually, mentally, physically, in any way, topically, with my thought, at the speed of thought. And therefore, I want to talk about this, again, coming back to a little bit of history, in terms of these three waves of mobility that we've seen historically. Two we've seen historically. Third, I would say, defines the cusp that Surya talked about where we are right now at this inflection point. This one is not owned by anybody yet. But I'll start with zero. That's me in 1971 on the first computer I ever saw. I rode my motorcycle up to Ottawa to the National Research Council, and I was doing a soundtrack for a film that I was writing music for on that computer in real time using a graphical interface with a mouse, a keyboard, thumb drives, real-time sound synthesis in 1971, when everybody else was using punch cards. I did not know that I died and gone to heaven, and it would take me 20 years to get back to that. But I have not had an original idea in my life. I experienced it all in that device that I had nothing to do about. But Ken Pulfer, who did that system, was at Engelbart's original demo in '68, the mother of all demos, and came back and built that. I still have the wooden carved mouse from that system that Engelbart and English taught Ken Pulfer and Grant Beckhold to build. And I used to have hair, that's proof. It's not reason my slides there. Let's be very clear. That isn't even showing the computer. There's as many refrigerator-sized things the other side. I have wristwatches that have more compute power, as do you, than that whole room. That was not mobile, but that's what computation was. That's when after I finished graduate school, even though it was before I ever went to graduate school. I'm still a music undergraduate. So let's go to where mobility really started to do in terms of the first wave of mobile. We could argue came with this device here, the Casio PF3000, which was released in 1983. And this is where calculators made the transformation into information appliances because they had memory and data banks and stuff like that. I don't care if you have better examples. Please tell me if you do, especially if they're earlier. I'll add them to my collection. But for the time being, let's let this be a placeholder and say, this is the start of the PDA. And this is a really important example. And you'll notice I've said 1998 because that's the Palm 3 rather than 1996, which is the original Palm, which by the way was not called the Palm Pilot, it was just called the Pilot. And why this is important is because we all probably have read about, well, maybe we haven't actually because I'm dating myself. Many people have read about the Palm Pilot. And they have read about this Jeff Hawkins book and sort of say the whole reason the Palm Pilot was successful is because it was small, had low functionality, it fit in your hands, it was affordable. Those are all true, but in my collection, I have several examples that meet those criteria and in many ways better. Do not believe anybody other than trust your critical ability to look at history and reread it and don't take the stated things at face value. It's fake news. Sorry, I had to throw that in just as an example. Now, it could be. Critical thinking is the most important tool we have. Does anybody want to shout out why the Palm Pilot, what really made it successful? And by the way, the Palm Pilot has 78% market share in PDAs when Microsoft was competing furiously in that space and losing. And at the same time, Microsoft was being hammered for supposedly being this monopoly that nobody can compete with. And they really got beaten by a little startup where none of these monoliths could compete. And that's very rarely mentioned. So why? Why was it so successful if it wasn't for the smaller and easier to use and cheaper? Hot sink. Think about it for a minute. That hot sink, it was the first PDA that you could get it out of the box, and in one button push, it would synchronize with all of your information into there without having to key it in manually. And it didn't matter what, it was agnostic to whether you had a Macintosh or a PC. It was agnostic to what calendar program or data you had. Everything just happened in one button push. And from then on, you could drop it in less than a minute, one button push, and whether you entered the data in the Palm Pilot or the other device, it just happened automatically, and you put it away. If you lost it, you were out the depreciated cost of a $200 device your employer probably paid for anyhow, and maybe one day's work, because it was so, the affordances, it was like one button. It was costless. It was free to keep it in sync. Nobody else could do that at the time. That was the differentiator. But notice, that was its integration and developing a social relationship with the other technologies in your personal ecosystem, and so you could take what you could seamlessly at the best ability at the time and carry it around with you, and then bring it back and then integrate it again. It was a seamless flow of your data at almost no cost. And that was it. But the reason I have the Palm 3, because the original Pilot had that, was the 3, they introduced beaming. How many people here can walk up to somebody and with complete security because of line of sight, beam their business card to another person? Can anybody do that right now? Who can do it? And now we sort of say, hey, we're really smart. Post iPhone, if you could do that in 1998, why can't you do it today? Bluetooth didn't improve it because it goes through walls and goes the other direction. It's not line of sight. Oh, but IRs is so primitive, it's not. No, you threw the baby out with the bathwater. We did, collectively. And it's important to understand it was the flow that brought that through. And the history you've read by Jeff or anyone else is mostly wrong, in my opinion. And it's only my opinion, but I've been around.